It's been a wild ride reviewing the first stage of every game from the 2016 World Chess Championship, but Grandmaster Alexander Ipatov is no quitter, and he's here to help us finish off the day of rapid tiebreaks. And on that note, Sasha, I'm going to let you take the wheel and start things off by telling us why Carlsen played the move knight to b8 on move 9 in game one of the tiebreaks, perhaps, rather than trying to repeat the ideas that we've seen him play both knight a5 in game 2 and the move bishop to e6 as was played in game 11. What is the idea behind knight to b8, and why do you think Carlsen went for it?
Well, first of all, Danny, this is a typical Magnus. I mean, so Karakin once again expressed a desire to repeat the games 2 and 11, but Magnus is wise and he tries to avoid the opponent's preparation. So he did not go for knight a5, bishop a6, or for the direct move bishop a6. The idea of knight b8 is to play maybe c5 and gain some space in the center, and maybe then to go back to c6 with a knight.
Okay. So again, it's a practical approach by the world champion, not letting Karyakin show what him and his team of seconds have come up with. And after c5 and the knight comes back to c6, just as you described, we get the move c3 and now rook to b8, which is the first official novelty, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So the idea of rook b8 is to play a5 and b4 and try to trade some pawns and open the b file on the queen side.
Okay.
The theory is move bishop e6, but maybe it was analyzed by Karakin's team. So once again, Magnus tries to avoid theory.
Okay. And on that note of expanding on the queen side, it's exactly what we see the world champion do. A5 met by a4, but here comes b4, just as you said. And a few more moves are getting us into a position that, though original, is very typical of how we've seen these players play. A closed sort of maneuvering Spanish, and one where the world champion equalized very, very comfortably with black once again, correct?
Yeah, I think so that in this position, black is doing fine because all his pieces are well placed, and also white has to be careful about d6, d5, so that black might play.
Okay, and so regardless of what ended up happening in game one, we all know now that it was eventually a draw. It seems that the first stage of the game and the first person to surprise once again was the world champion. So let's move on to game two, where things start to heat up. Gets a little more exciting for you and I because Carlsen played the Italian, which was something we predicted would happen, correct?
Yeah, that's right. We spoke about this just 2 days ago.
And the flexibility that white gets in this line is why we predicted Magnus might go for it. But the first real moment to even note, to even slow down, is probably right here on move 8, where Magnus chose to play the move rook to e1 rather than the move that was played in game 5 with b4. Why do you think he chose to vary here?
Well, rook e1 is a bit more solid move. He keeps the idea of b4 for the future. So it's just a normal developing move. Maybe he wants to play knight b2, knight f1 first, and then d4 or b4, depending on how black develops.
And probably it had a little something to do with the fact that b4 in game 5 did not achieve anything, especially once Karyakin achieved the center fork trick here with knight takes e4, right?
Sure.
And so we get bishop a7 after rook e1. All roads seem to be pretty normal here. Both sides developing. Now here Carlsen says, I'm not going to let you get that center fork again, right? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. I don't think so. He plays bishop f1. But really, I think right here is the first moment of note in terms of being a little bit quizzical about why Karyakin plays a5. Is this opening theory? What's the idea in this pawn structure for black to put the pawn on a5?
Well, the idea of a5, first of all, is not to let white play a4, a5, and gain space advantage on the queen side. Also, maybe the idea of a5 is not to let white play b2, b4 so easily. Okay. But I personally don't like this move because it allows white to establish his knight on c4 quite comfortably. And the knight from c4 will be able to attack the a5 pawn. And also, white can use the a7, a6, a5 move by extending and opening up the position on the queen side and playing b2, b4. And this is exactly what Magnus did later. So I'm not sure whether this move was good.
Okay, so interesting. I think the motives are clear from what you described, which are educational for our viewers, to stop a5 by white, make b4 harder, but still a very double-edged move. Perhaps the move we analyzed, rook e8, would have been a little more flexible for Sergei, for those wondering. And noted should be that it also immediately prevents knight to c4 for tactical reasons because the e4 pawn falls. So after a5, Carlsen took your advice and immediately developed a plan that establishes this knight on c4. And once he got the knight there, he didn't look back. He followed up with b4 and went on to achieve a completely dominating position in this middle game and later on. And though, okay, once again, anybody who's been following the match closely knows that this was maybe a critical turning point in the match when Sergei Karyakin held a lost position for another time, denying Magnus Carlsen a decisive victory, which sent us into Game 3 with the score being gridlocked. But it doesn't change the fact that the opening stage of Game 2 definitely went to the world champion. So, on to Game 3. Sasha, we're right back in our very, very favorite position, a position we've learned to swallow whether we like it or not, right? And tell the fans what Magnus did here, surprising everybody, finally going back to the first approach he took, but with a different idea in mind. Go ahead and take the wheel here.
Yeah, well, so Danny, so like 2 hours before Game 3, Magnus had played knight b8. It's just the same day, and in Game 3, he does not wish to repeat the first rapid game, so he goes back to Game 2 from the classical chess, and so he plays knight a5, bishop a2, bishop a6. So now Magnus wishes to repeat their game, but now Karyakin is the first one to surprise. So he plays b4, which is still a theory. So this is not really a surprise, but still.
But is it surprising that I think this whole time we've been setting the tone for the fact that if Magnus ever repeats, Sergei Karyakin's seconds are going to have some sort of opening idea prepared. But they didn't even go back for what they played in Game 2 with the move d4. As we saw in that game, Magnus traded on a2 and then played this sort of very interesting kind of novelty idea, rook e8. But Karyakin's team didn't even have anything prepared against this. They just changed up right away with b4. Is that sort of a bad sign that they weren't able to come up with anything and they just go back into regularly traveled theoretical roads?
Well, I think they actually came up with something. I mean, we could not see it in this game because Magnus was quite wise and he once again avoided theory.
Okay.
So b4 is still a theoretical move like d4, but Magnus was quite wise in his opening choice. I mean, so the main theory is bishop takes a2 first, rook takes a2, and then knight c6. But he played knight c6, and there was only one game in the database with this move.
So if I gather what you're saying, if I gather it correctly, you're saying that it's unfair to blame Sergei Karyakin or his team of seconds for not varying earlier or for not going back into what they did in Game 2. It's just giving credit to Magnus Carlsen and his approach that, once again, he was the first to surprise, even with repeating what they did in Game 2 when he played this move 11, knight to c6.
Yes, I think we can give credit to both teams, first of all, because I'm sure that Karyakin's team came up with something after move b4, but Magnus was wise to avoid this, so he surprised first.
Okay, so after knight to c6, he is surprising first. It's not officially a novelty, one move, but now we get the first official novelty with Magnus going back to an idea that he actually played, I think, in Game 11, even though it's not exactly the same position, meeting White's knight move with another knight move. So now we're in original territory. What's going on here? Explain the position for us.
Yeah, so as you already underlined, we have seen the similar position in Game 11. The difference is that the white bishop was on b3 and the pawn was on b2. So now the pawn is on b4 and the bishop is on a2. But the idea is the same. Black wants to trade some knights and gain some space back in the center.
Okay. And White's options are, well, we'll go with what Sergei Karyakin did. He played knight to g5, but now Magnus shows that either he's just really great at coming up with ideas over the board, or he had his own novelty prepared here, because this forcing series of moves that starts with capturing on d5, knight to d7 to gain a tempo, and then the immediate driving home of this f-pawn, suddenly even the engines, the more time you give them to think, really like Black's chances in this position. So amazing to see the world champion grab the bull by the horns and get such a good position as Black so quickly, yes?
Yeah, I mean, that was a great decision, a great preparation by Magnus. I mean, from the first point of view, it looks like a very suspicious idea to give up the e4 square, like White has a bishop pair, the great e4 square for the knight, and so on. But when we start to dig deeper in the position, we see that Black wants to play f4, f3, and weaken the White's camp on the king side. And if White wants to prevent f4, f3 by Black, he'll have to play f2, f3 himself, which would weaken the e3 square. And this is exactly what happened later in the game. So Black managed to establish his knight on e3 square.
And again, for those who didn't know, if you're finding for the first time, Magnus Carlsen did go on to win this game with black, showing that he was not frustrated after failing to win in game 2 and really taking the match in complete control. Now he gets the white pieces in game 4, and so for the first time, he may be actually forcing the challenger's hand to do something other than e5, and that's exactly what we saw. Karyakin played the Sicilian here in game 4. Magnus says, okay, I'm not afraid. We'll go in for the open Sicilian. Now Sergey starts to mix things up a little bit, plays this obscure variation with an early e5 that often can run into positional issues if white goes for the bishop to b5 check, trying to eliminate the light square piece, which is supposed to guard this square. But Magnus wasn't even interested in that, Sasha. He played knight to b3 with the immediate intention of getting a Maroczy bind structure, because if there's any position that makes it really easy to at least get a draw, it's a Maroczy bind, right?
Well, yes, because white is quite solid, and the only thing that white needs to do is to take care of b5 or d5, and this is exactly what white managed to achieve in this game. So the pawn on c4 prevents both d5 and b5. So white's plan is quite easy, just to complete the development, put all the pieces to the center, and just wait.
Yeah, so despite not going for the sharper lines with bishop b5, as I mentioned, seems like Magnus made the right practical match choice. We have a Maroczy bind, and really the opening stage is already very clearly comfortable for white, the kind of position that almost plays itself. White establishes the threats of b4, the pieces slowly start to reactivate themselves, and white has a very dominant space advantage here. And so, all things considered, we look back at the rapid tie breaks and we make a decision who won the opening stage. I think the choice is clear, Sasha.
Well, you're right. Before the match, everyone had expected that Karyakin would be a favorite in the opening stage. But as it turned out, Magnus was better practically prepared. Maybe from the theoretical point of view, Karyakin had better analysis and stuff, but practically we see that Carlsen was wiser with his opening decisions, and he managed to avoid his opponent's preparation. So, of course, the opening battle victory goes after Magnus.